The sky over the industrial world of Ord Mantell did not just turn dark, it broke open like a shattered mirror. There was no warning from the scanners and no reading on the radars before the purple lightning tore through the atmosphere. Clouds evaporated instantly, and the air pressure dropped so fast that windows in the capital city blew outward and shattered in the streets below. A sound like a dying god screamed across the planet and forced millions of people to cover their ears in pain. This was not an invasion fleet coming out of hyperspace. It was something much worse. It was a bleeding wound in the fabric of reality itself. Above the planet, the Republic cruiser Resolute shook violently as its shields failed without being hit by a single laser blast. Anakin Skywalker stood on the bridge and gripped the railing until the metal bent under his gloved hand. He felt a disturbance in the Force that was not cold like the dark side or warm like the light. It felt heavy. It felt like an entire ocean of anger and hope and desperation was pouring into the galaxy through a hole that should not exist. The alarms on the bridge screamed, but the crew was too frozen by the sight outside to move. A tear in space glowed with green and black energy that crackled with enough power to vaporize a moon. The laws of physics groaned under the weight of the intrusion. Gravity around the ship fluctuated wildly and threw officers from their stations. From that tear, something small fell toward the surface of the planet. It was not a ship. It was a boy. Izuku Midoriya did not know he was falling through a different universe. He only knew pain. His body was broken in a dozen places and his costume was shredded. The last thing he remembered was the face of Tamura Shigaraki and the feeling of one for all burning through his veins like a wildfire. He had pushed beyond 100%. He had pushed beyond what a human body could hold. The backlash had not just knocked him back, it had punched a hole through the dimensional wall. Now he tumbled through the grey clouds of Ord Mantell, trailing black smoke and green sparks. The Force reacted to him violently. The energy field that bound the galaxy together recoiled from him because he carried a power that did not follow its rules. One for All was not a gift from the midi-chlorians. It was a stockpile power of sheer human will cultivated over generations, and it was dense and heavy. As Izuku fell, the air around him heated up until he became a streak of fire. He crashed into a scrapyard on the edge of the city with the force of a meteor. The impact created a crater 50 feet wide and sent a shockwave that knocked over battle droids and clone troopers alike in the nearby sector. Dust and smoke rose in a mushroom cloud that blocked out the sun. On the ground, Captain Rex shielded his eyes from the blast. The battle against the separatist droids had stopped instantly. Both sides stared at the smoking crater. The logic of the war had been broken by an event that made no sense. Rex motioned for his men to hold their fire. He approached the rim of the pit with his blaster raised, but his finger was not on the trigger. He looked down. In the center of the scorched earth lay a teenager with green hair and strange red shoes. The boy was bleeding, and his skin was covered in black whip-like energy that faded slowly. The energy felt angry. It felt like it was alive. Izuku gasped for air, and his eyes snapped open. They glowed with a terrifying green light that cut through the dust. He tried to stand but collapsed again. The ground beneath him cracked just from the weight of his presence. He whispered a name that Rex did not know. He whispered, "All Might." Then the boy passed out, and the green lightning stopped. But the silence that followed was heavy. Every Jedi in the galaxy, from the temple on Coruscant to the outer rim, felt a sudden shift in the balance. The prophecy had not predicted this. The war had just changed. The visitor had not come to save them or to fight them. He had simply crashed into their world, and the laws of physics were already bending around him to make room for his power. Captain Rex did not have time to process the absurdity of the situation, because the separatist tactical droid commanding the battalion on the ridge had just recalculated its odds. The logic circuits of the machine determined that the anomaly in the crater represented a higher value asset, worth more than the city itself. The command to capture the target was issued instantly. A hail of red blaster fire erupted from the tree line and scorched the air above the crater. Rex tackled the unconscious boy and covered him with his own armored body as plasma bolts chewed up the dirt around them. The boy was incredibly heavy. He did not feel like a normal human teenager. His limbs were dense like solid durasteel, and the air around him still smelled of ozone and burning copper. Rex shouted for Jesse and Fives to suppress the ridge while he tried to drag the stranger to cover. It took effort. The boy was dead weight, but he felt anchored to the ground by more than just gravity. It was as if his physical presence was resisting being moved. A rocket droid fired a missile that screamed toward their position. Rex braced for an impact that would surely kill them both, but the explosion never came. The missile stopped in midair 10 feet away and crumpled into a ball of useless metal before dropping harmlessly to the ground. Anakin Skywalker landed in the crater with a thud. The general stood with his hand outstretched and his brow furrowed. Anakin did not look at the droids. He looked at the boy on the ground. The Jedi Knight felt a wave of nausea that he had never experienced before. Usually, the Force flowed through living things like a river, but around this boy, the river hit a dam. There was no emptiness in the stranger and no quiet. There was a roaring cacophony of voices and power that felt ancient and desperate. Anakin deflected a blaster bolt without looking and signaled for the gunship. They needed to get this variable off the battlefield immediately. The extraction was chaotic. As the low-altitude assault transport lifted off the ground with the unconscious boy secured in the bay, the separatist forces abandoned all other objectives and focused every gun on the ship. Vulture droids swarmed down from the clouds like angry wasps. Anakin stood at the open bay door and deflected laser fire with his lightsaber, while Rex and the Kai clones fired back. The ship shook violently. The boy on the stretcher twitched. His fingers dug into the metal of the cot and crushed the reinforced alloy like it was wet clay. Green sparks danced across his skin again, and the ship's navigational computer shorted out for 3 seconds. Anakin felt a spike of danger that was sharp and metallic. It was not coming from the droids. It was coming from the passenger. On board the Veneta-class Star Destroyer Resolute, the medical bay was silent, except for the hum of scanners that were giving impossible readings. Kix, the clone medic, stared at the holographic display and shook his head. The patient's heart rate was 40 beats per minute, but his blood pressure was high enough to burst a normal human's veins. His bone density was 4 times the galactic standard. There were scars covering his arms and hands that looked like the result of explosive decompression or repeated crushing trauma. But the strangest thing was the reading from the midi-chlorian count. There were none. 0. By all biological laws of the Star Wars universe, the boy should be dead, or a lifeless husk disconnected from the living force. Yet he was radiating so much energy that the medical droids were overheating just by being near him. Anakin watched through the observation glass. He had contacted Obi-Wan Kenobi on Coruscant, but the transmission had been garbled by static. The arrival of the boy had created a disruption in the hyperspace lanes that was still settling. Ahsoka Tano stood next to Anakin. She looked uneasy. She told her master that being near the room made her head hurt. She said it felt like standing next to a reactor that was about to breach. Anakin told her to stay back. He needed to understand what this was. He entered the medical bay, and the doors hissed shut behind him. Inside the room, the air was hot. Izuku Midoriya was dreaming of the vestige world. He was standing in the black void of One for All, but the smoke was agitated. The predecessors were silent. They were looking up at the sky of their inner world, which was usually dark, but was now streaked with foreign stars. The first user looked at Izuku with a grave expression. He told Izuku that they were no longer in Japan. He told him that the rules of cause and effect had been rewritten. Izuku tried to ask what happened, but the void was ripped away by a sensation of drowning. He woke up gasping. His eyes shot open, and the first thing he felt was the danger sense quirk. It did not just buzz, it screamed. It was a constant high-pitched wail that threatened to split his skull. In his world, danger sense reacted to immediate malice or intent to harm. Here, on a warship in a galaxy consumed by a galactic civil war, malice was everywhere. It was in the background radiation. It was in the minds of the soldiers preparing for death. It was in the cold, mechanical logic of the enemy fleets. The sheer volume of hostility in the universe hit Izuku like a physical blow. He thrashed against the restraints. The leather straps snapped instantly. The metal cuffs groaned and twisted. Anakin Skywalker raised his hand and pushed with the force. He intended to hold the boy down gently to prevent him from hurting himself. He expected the force to wrap around the boy like a blanket. Instead, the force slid off. Izuku's will was too solid. The energy of One for All pushed back against the telekinetic grip, not with technique, but with raw, stubborn mass. Izuku scrambled off the bed and backed into the corner. He was hyperventilating. His vision was blurry and his body screamed in agony from the dimension-breaking fall. He saw a man in dark robes with a laser sword. He saw the white armored soldiers outside the glass. His tactical mind tried to process the data. Not heroes, not police. Military. He was on a ship. The gravity was slightly off. The air smelled recycled. Izuku activated full cowl at 5%. It was all he could manage without shattering his bones again. Green lightning crackled around him, and the medical equipment in the room exploded in showers of sparks. Anakin ignited his lightsaber. The blue blade hummed. He told the boy to stand down. He spoke in Galactic Basic, but the intent was clear. Izuku did not understand the language, but he understood the stance. It was a defensive guard. Form Vi. Solid. Dominant. Izuku tried to speak. He asked where he was. He asked about Shigaraki. The words came out in Japanese and sounded like gibberish to Anakin. The Jedi took a step forward. Danger sense flared again. Izuku reacted on instinct. He fired a black whip tendril from his left arm. The black energy cord lashed out and wrapped around a heavy medical scanner, trying to fling it at the swordsman to create distance. Anakin did not dodge. He sliced the scanner in half with a casual flick of his wrist. But when the lightsaber blade made contact with the black whip energy, it did not cut through it. The plasma blade clashed against the quirk energy with a sound like a thunderclap. The lightsaber bounced off. Anakin's eyes widened. That was impossible. A lightsaber cut through anything except Beskar or Cortosis. This black rope was made of energy, but it had mass. Izuku used the distraction to launch himself toward the ceiling vent. He needed to hide. He needed to assess. He moved faster than a non-force sensitive human should move. He was a blur of green and black. Anakin reached out again, and this time he did not try to hold the boy's body. He tried to grab the boy's mind. He used a Jedi mind trick not to control but to pacify. He projected a wave of calm and sleep. The mental invasion hit Izuku's mind fortress. In the Star Wars universe, A mind without mental shields is an open book. But Izuku did not have an open mind. He had 8 minds. Anakin's consciousness collided with the mental barrier of one for all, and he was thrown back physically. He stumbled and deactivated his lightsaber. He heard voices in his head that were not his own. He heard a woman's voice speaking of sacrifice. He heard a man's voice talking about duty. He saw a vision of a blonde man smiling while dying. The feedback loop broke the connection. Izuku froze. He felt the intrusion. It felt like the vestige world, but invasive and cold. He looked at Anakin. He saw the shock on the Jedi's face. Izuku realized this man was not a villain. A villain would have attacked while he was vulnerable. This man was confused. Izuku powered down. The green lightning faded. He raised his hand slowly. It was the universal sign of surrender. The danger sense reduced to a dull throb. Anakin regained his balance and looked at the boy with a new kind of wariness. This was not a biological anomaly. This was a walking tear in the Force. The boy was a nexus of something else, something older, or perhaps something from so far away that the Force did not know how to touch it. Rex and the clones burst into the room with blasters drawn. Anakin raised his hand to stop them. He told them to lower their weapons. He said the prisoner was secure. Izuku slid down the wall and sat on the floor. He was exhausted. His stomach growled loud enough to be heard over the ship's engines. The tension in the room broke slightly. Anakin clipped his lightsaber to his belt. He pointed to himself and said his name. Skywalker. Izuku looked at him. He pointed to himself. Deku. Far away on Coruscant, inside the High Council chamber of the Jedi Temple, Master Yoda dropped his cane. The noise echoed in the quiet room. Mace Windu stopped mid-sentence. They both felt it. It was not a disturbance in the Force caused by the Sith. It was the feeling of a new weight being added to the scale. Yoda closed his eyes and hummed. He said that a great distance had been crossed. He said that the shroud of the dark side had fallen, but a new light had crashed through it. A light that burned without the Force. Palpatine felt it too, in his office in the Senate district. The Chancellor stood by the window, looking out at the city planet. He felt a tremor of genuine fear for the first time in decades. His grand plan relied on his ability to foresee every variable and manipulate every outcome. But he could not foresee this. This Deku was a blind spot, a variable that did not obey the rules of destiny. Palpatine's yellow eyes narrowed. If he could not predict it, he would have to study it, and if he could not control it, he would have to destroy it before it unraveled the Sith grand plan. Back on the Resolute, the ship dropped out of hyperspace to rendezvous with the fleet. Izuku was moved to a secure holding cell, not because he was a prisoner, but because he was a biohazard. The droids provided him with food, which he ate voraciously. As his glucose levels returned, his mind began to sharpen. He started to analyze. The technology was advanced far beyond support items from back home. Holograms, faster than light travel, laser weapons, but society seemed fractured. He saw war footage on a datapad that Anakin had left for him. He saw clones who all had the same face dying by the thousands. He saw droids marching on cities. He realized with a sinking heart that he had not escaped the war. He had just traded one war for another. And in this war, he was alone. He looked at his hand. The scars were still there. One for all was still there. But it felt different. The stockpile power was dense and quiet, waiting for him to call it. But the extra quirks, float, smokescreen, F.A. Jin, felt restricted. It was as if the physics of this universe were pressing down on them, making them harder to activate. He would have to relearn how to use his own body. Anakin and Ahsoka watched him from the security monitors. Ahsoka asked her master what they were going to do with him. Anakin said they were taking him to Coruscant. The council needed to see this. But Anakin had a secret thought he did not share. He felt a strange kinship with the boy. He had felt the anger inside Deku during the brief mental contact. It was a righteous anger, the anger of someone who wanted to save everyone and was frustrated by his own weakness. It was the same anger Anakin carried every day. He wondered if this boy would be a powerful ally or if he was a mirror showing Anakin what happened when a hero pushed too far. The Resolute prepared for the jump to Coruscant. The vibration of the hyperdrive engines hummed through the floor. Izuku closed his eyes and tried to meditate like he had seen the Jedi do. He reached out not with the Force, but with his feelings. He tried to find a connection to home. There was nothing, just the cold void between stars and the burning presence of the war. He tightened his fists. If he was stuck here, he would not sit idle. A hero meddled where he wasn't wanted. That was the essence of being a hero. He would find out who was hurting in this galaxy, and he would help them, even if it broke the rules, even if it broke him. The ship jumped to light speed, and the stars stretched into infinite lines of white light, marking the beginning of the age of the anomaly. The arrival on Coruscant was not a moment of wonder. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a moment of suffocating realization. The planetary city did not look like the futuristic utopias of his manga back home. From the viewport of the shuttle, it looked like a circuit board that had overgrown its boundaries and choked the life out of the earth beneath it. There was no green. There was only metal, light, and the endless streams of traffic that looked like blood flowing through transparent veins. Anakin Skywalker sat opposite him and watched the boy's reaction. Izuku had spent the hyperspace journey with a protocol droid named C-3PO, cramming the syntax of Galactic Basic into his head with the same obsessive intensity he once used to analyze hero quirks. He spoke with a heavy accent and broken grammar, but he understood enough to know that the planet below housed a population of trillions. The sheer density of life triggered his danger sense in a low, constant hum that felt like a migraine behind his eyes. It was not immediate danger. It was the background radiation of suffering. In a city of that size, with layers of poverty buried miles beneath the surface, there was always someone screaming for help. To a hero whose power was tuned to answer those screams, the silence of the Jedi sitting across from him was deafening. Ahsoka Tano guided the shuttle toward the Jedi temple. The structure rose from the industrial sprawl like a mountain of stone and serenity. It was beautiful, but to Izuku, it felt isolated. It was a fortress looking down on the people, not a headquarters among them. The landing platform was windy. The air at this altitude was thin and cold. A delegation was waiting. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood with his arms folded inside his sleeves, and his expression was unreadable. Beside him stood Mace Windu, whose presence felt to Izuku like a steel wall. There were no smiles. This was not a rescue mission returning home. It was the transport of a dangerous, unparalleled variable. Anakin placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. The metal fingers of his prosthetic pressed firmly into the fabric of Izuku's tattered hero costume. It was a gesture of support, but also a warning to stay close. They walked into the temple halls. The architecture was designed to humble visitors. Vast columns and high ceilings made everyone feel small. But Izuku did not feel small. He felt heavy. The one-for-all stockpile inside him was reacting to the concentrated force energy of the temple. It was like bringing a magnet into a room full of iron filings. The air seemed to thicken around him. Younglings stopped their training to stare. They did not sense the force in him. They sensed the absence of it, a void that walked. The High Council chamber was circular and bathed in the light of the setting sun. Izuku stood in the center of the mosaic floor. He felt 12 pairs of eyes on him. Master Yoda sat in his small chair, and his ears twitched. He did not look at Izuku's face. He looked at Izuku's chest where the core of his power burned. The questioning began. It was not an interrogation about where he came from, but what he was. Mace Windu leaned forward. He asked why the Force did not touch him. He asked why the boy's presence felt like a wound in the galaxy. Izuku tried to explain quirks. He tried to explain that in his world, power was biological, not spiritual. He spoke of evolution and genetics. The Jedi listened with skepticism. To them, there was only the Force. Life created it and made it grow. A being that existed outside of that cycle was an abomination or a threat. Ki-Adi-Mundi suggested that perhaps the boy was a creation of the Sith alchemy, designed to be undetectable. Anakin stepped forward to defend him. He spoke of the boy's actions on Ord Mantell. He spoke of the boy's light. Yoda raised a hand and silence fell. The Grand Master hobbled off his chair and approached Izuku. He poked Izuku's leg with his Gaima stick. He told the boy to close his eyes. He told him to reach out. Izuku obeyed. He closed his eyes and reached for the energy around him. He did not find the Force. He found the vestiges. The smoke of One for All swirled in the council chamber, overlaying the physical reality. The first user appeared behind Izuku, transparent and ghostly, facing the Jedi Masters. Yoda's eyes widened. He saw them. For a fraction of a second, the ancient Jedi Master saw the line of ghosts standing guard over the boy. He saw the will of generations passed down, not through destiny, but through choice. Yoda staggered back. He felt a profound sadness and a terrifying resolve. This power was not of the Force. It was of man. It was the stubborn refusal of humanity to accept fate. Yoda looked at Mace Windu and said that the boy was not a Sith, but he was dangerous. He carried the weight of a dying world on his back. The decision was made to keep Izuku under observation within the temple. He was not to leave. He was not to use his abilities. He was to be studied. It was a containment strategy. Izuku accepted it because he had no choice and no resources, but he did not accept the philosophy. In the days that followed, he debated with Ahsoka in the gardens. She explained the Jedi code. There is no emotion. There is peace. Izuku argued back. He told her that emotion was the fuel for saving people. He told her that a smile was a tool to lower the fear of civilians. He told her that suppressing fear did not make it go away. It just made you blind to it. Ahsoka found his views chaotic but compelling. Anakin watched them from a distance. He saw in Izuku a reflection of his own frustrations. Anakin had always been told his attachments were a weakness. Here was a boy whose power literally came from his attachment to others, and he was strong. It planted a seed of doubt in the Chosen One's mind that Palpatine would later water. The catastrophe arrived 3 days later. It did not start with a grand battle fleet. It started with a failure of infrastructure. The lower levels of Coruscant Sector 1313 were a labyrinth of decay and neglect. A structural support column compromised by a separatist sabotage bomb weeks earlier finally gave way. The tremors shook the entire district. In the upper levels, the Senate Plaza was hosting a gala. The vibration knocked glasses off tables, but miles below, a mega-block apartment complex housing 50,000 sentient beings groaned and began to tilt. The distress signal went out. The Jedi Council dispatched teams immediately to stabilize the structure and evacuate the VIPs in the sector. Anakin and Obi-Wan were assigned to the rescue. Izuku was in the temple library studying galactic history. When the alarms blared, he saw the images on the holonet monitors. A building the size of a city falling, people trapping. The Jedi were moving to secure the perimeter and hold the structure with the Force. Izuku did not ask for permission. The logic of the situation overrode the logic of his confinement. The Jedi were few. The civilians were many. The math required more hands. He ran to the hangar. He did not steal a ship. He stole a speeder bike. He did not know how to fly it properly, but his reflexes allowed him to compensate for his lack of skill. He weaved through the chaotic air traffic of Coruscant, a streak of green lightning cutting through the orderly lanes of sky lanes. He arrived at the sector before many of the emergency crews. The scene was apocalyptic. The mega block was leaning at a 45-degree angle. It was grinding against the neighboring tower, raining debris the size of houses down into the dark abyss of the Undercity. Dust clouds choked the air. Jedi Knights were on the nearby platforms, their hands raised, their faces strained in concentration as they used the Force to slow the collapse. But it was too heavy. The physics of 1 billion tons of durasteel were winning against the mystical energy field. Anakin was on a platform near the base of the tilt. He was pushing with everything he had. He saw the green blur arrive. He shouted for Izuku to stay back. The structure was unstable. If the boy interfered, he could disrupt the delicate balance the Jedi were maintaining. Izuku ignored him. He did not go to the platforms. He went to the impact point. He saw that the Jedi were trying to hold the building up from the outside. But the structural failure was internal. The spine of the building was snapping. Izuku dove into the shattered facade of the sinking tower. He navigated the tilting corridors, bouncing off walls, using Black Whip to pull debris off trapped civilians. He found a family of Twi'leks pinned under a beam. He smashed the beam with a 5% smash and carried them to a balcony. He saw a transport ship hovering nearby, unable to get close because of the falling debris. Izuku jumped. He kicked the air using the air pressure change to propel himself and the family across the gap. He landed on the transport gently, but the building gave another groan. The tilt increased. The Jedi on the outside were losing their grip. Master Plo Koon shouted that they had to release it. The strain was going to kill the Jedi holding it. They had to let it fall and hope the evacuation was sufficient. It was the pragmatic choice, the utilitarian choice. Save the rescuers to save others later. Izuku heard the order over the comms of the clone troopers on the transport. Let it fall. He looked back at the building. His danger sense was not ringing for himself. It was ringing for the thousands still inside. The heat signatures were everywhere. They were abandoning them. The code of the hero, which had been burned into his DNA by All Might, screamed in protest. You do not abandon. You go beyond. Izuku leapt off the safety of the transport. He shot back toward the doomed building. Anakin screamed his name. Izuku did not listen. He activated float. He suspended himself in the air directly under the buckling section of the mega block spine. He was a speck of dust against a falling mountain. He closed his eyes and pulled on the stockpile. Not 5%, not 20. He needed everything. The lines on his skin glowed so bright they shone through his costume. The green lightning turned white. He grabbed the falling superstructure with Black Whip, wrapping the tendrils around the load-bearing girders. He planted his feet in the empty air using the float quirk to create an anchor point. He screamed. Smash! The force of the impact created a shockwave that shattered windows for 10 blocks. Izuku Midoriya caught the building. He did not just slow it down. He stopped it. The sudden deceleration caused his bones to fracture instantly. His arms turned purple. Blood burst from the capillaries in his eyes. But he held. The metaphysical weight of One for All clashed with the gravity of Coruscant. The sheer denial of physics sent a ripple through the force that every Jedi on the planet felt. It was not a ripple of harmony. It was a ripple of violation. Izuku was forcing the universe to pause. He was imposing his will on reality. The building hung in the air, suspended by black tendrils and a small broken boy. "Evacuate!" Izuku screamed. His voice was distorted by the raw energy pouring out of his mouth. "Get them out!" The Jedi were stunned. They had stopped pushing. They were watching a miracle that terrified them. Anakin was the first to react. He realized what the boy was doing. He was killing himself to buy time. Anakin rallied the clones. "You heard him. Move in. Get everyone out. Now." The rescue ship swarmed the suspended building. For 3 minutes, Izuku held the weight of a city block. For 3 minutes he burned. He felt his muscle fibers tearing and knitting back together only to tear again. The vestiges were screaming in his mind, telling him the vessel couldn't take it. The fourth user told him his heart was going to explode. Izuku told them to shut up. He thought of his mother. He thought of Uraraka. He thought of the smile he had to maintain, even though no one could see his face through the energy storm. When the last transport cleared the danger zone, Izuku let go. The building fell. It crashed into the lower levels with the sound of the world ending. But the people were safe. Izuku fell with it. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. Anakin caught him with the Force mere feet above the wreckage. The Jedi Knight pulled the boy to the platform. Izuku was mangled. His arms were twisted at impossible angles. His costume was burned away from his torso, revealing the scars of previous battles now joined by fresh ones. He looked like a corpse, but he was breathing. The aftermath was not a celebration. It was a political and theological crisis. The footage of the Green Lightning event spread across the holonet before the Jedi could censor it. Citizens of the Republic saw a boy who was not a Jedi do what the Jedi could not. They saw him bleed for them. They saw him break himself for strangers. In the Senate, Palpatine watched the footage with a cold calculation. He saw the threat to his order, but he also saw the ultimate tool against the Jedi. The Jedi were guardians of peace, but they were distant. This boy was a symbol, and symbols could be corrupted. In the temple infirmary, the mood was grim. The healers were working around the clock. They could knit the bones, but they could not explain the energy readings. Mace Windu stood outside the glass. He told Yoda that the boy was too dangerous to be left unchecked. He had acted without orders. He had used power that threatened the stability of the surroundings. He had proven that he put his own moral compass above the wisdom of the Council. Windu proposed imprisonment or exile to a world where he could do no harm. Anakin stood by the bed. He heard Windu's proposal, and he felt a spark of rage that was hotter than a lightsaber. He looked at Izuku, who was wrapped in a bacta bandages. He looked at the boy who had done exactly what a hero should do, and he realized that the Jedi Council was afraid. They were not afraid of the Sith. They were afraid of being obsolete. They were afraid of a power that did not need their dogma to be righteous. Anakin turned to Obi-Wan and said quietly that if the Council touched the boy, they would have to go through him. It was the first time Anakin had openly threatened the Order. The schism had begun. The irreversible catastrophe was not the building falling. It was the moment the galaxy realized that the Jedi were not the only gods in the sky. And it was the moment Izuku Midoriya realized that in this universe doing the right thing was a crime. He woke up 2 days later. His body was stiff and heavy. He could feel the eyes on him. He could feel the fear in the force surrounding the temple. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. He had saved them. He knew he had. But as he looked at the stern faces of the masters entering his room, he realized that saving everyone had cost him his freedom. The timeline had shifted. The Clone Wars were no longer just a battle between the Republic and the Separatists. It was now a battle for the definition of power itself. And Izuku was the battlefield. Palpatine made his move the next morning. He did not come as a Sith Lord. He came as the Supreme Chancellor. He demanded a meeting with the hero of Sector 1313. The Jedi could not refuse the leader of the Senate. Palpatine walked into the infirmary with a benevolent smile. He dismissed the Jedi guards. He sat beside Izuku's bed. He did not speak of the Force. He spoke of justice. He spoke of how frustrating it must be to have such power and be held back by archaic rules. He spoke to Izuku like a grandfather. He told Izuku that the Republic needed heroes like him. Heroes who were willing to do what was necessary. Izuku listened. He felt the danger sense buzzing low in the back of his neck, but he was confused. The man seemed kind, but the buzz would not stop. It was the first time Izuku's instinct clashed with his observation. He did not trust the Chancellor, but he could not afford to make an enemy of the only person offering him a path to help people. Palpatine left with a promise to grant Izuku special status within the Republic military, bypassing the Jedi Order's jurisdiction. It was a masterstroke. He had just deputized the anomaly, the lines of loyalty drawn in the sand. Izuku was now a piece on the board. The Jedi feared him. Anakin admired him. Palpatine coveted him, and the galaxy watched him. The one-for-all singularity had begun to merge with the Force, and the friction was generating sparks that would ignite a fire neither universe could extinguish. Izuku looked out the window of the temple at the endless city. He missed All Might. He missed his friends, but he tightened his bandaged fist. He was a hero, and a hero did not quit, even in a galaxy far, far away. The screen faded to black, not with a wipe, but with the slow closing of a heavy door. The integration of Izuku Midoriya into the Grand Army of the Republic was not smooth. It was a collision of two fundamentally different philosophies regarding the value of life. Under the direct decree of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, the boy was granted the rank of Special Commander, a title that existed outside the traditional Jedi hierarchy and reported nominally to the office of the Chancellor, while operating under the tactical supervision of General Skywalker. This political maneuvering infuriated the Jedi Council, who saw it as a dangerous erosion of their oversight. But to the clone troopers of the 501st Legion, it was a curiosity that quickly turned into a cult of personality. Izuku refused to wear the standard clone armor because it restricted his mobility, but he accepted reinforced plastoid plating that the armory technicians bolted directly onto his remaining hero costume. He looked like a scavenger, a patchwork of green fabric and White Republic armor, with his red boots standing out like beacons on the grey decks of the Star Destroyers. He spent his time not in the officers' mess, but in the barracks. He asked the clones about their names. He asked about their dreams. He took notes in a datapad he had scavenged, muttering incessantly about quirk application and combat variables. To the clones who had been bred to believe they were biological machinery, this attention was terrifying and intoxicating. They were used to Jedi who were distant and commanding. They were used to officers who saw them as numbers. Izuku Midoriya saw them as people, and that dangerous idea began to spread through the ranks like a virus. The first major test of this new variable came 3 weeks after the Coruscant incident on the fungal world of Beluchia. The separatist droid army had established a fortified perimeter around a series of water treatment plants that supplied the entire southern hemisphere. The siege had been grinding on for a month with heavy casualties on both sides. The environment was hostile with massive translucent plants that blocked sensor readings and humid air that rusted droid joints and jammed clone blasters. Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano were leading the assault, but the lines had stalled. The separatist commander, General Grievous, had arrived in system, and the droid tactics had shifted from attrition to brutal precision. Izuku was deployed via gunship into the forward operating base. The air smelled of rotting vegetation and ozone. He felt the danger sense buzzing constantly, a low-level static indicating that everything on this planet wanted to kill him, from the plants to the droids. Anakin met him at the landing zone. The Jedi looked tired. He told Izuku that the mission was simple. They needed to break the heavy cannon line on the ridge so the walkers could advance. Standard doctrine called for a frontal assault with clone jetpack troopers to draw fire while the Jedi flanked. It was a strategy that calculated an acceptable loss of 20% of the assault force. Izuku looked at the holographic map and Shai shook his head. He pointed to the ridge. He asked why they had to send the clones into the line of fire. Anakin explained that it was war, and in war soldiers died to secure objectives. Izuku rejected the premise. He argued that if he could move fast enough he could draw the fire himself. He proposed a diversion that relied entirely on his own speed and durability. Anakin hesitated. He saw the logic, but it went against every military protocol in the manual. A commander did not expose himself to save the foot soldiers, but Anakin was also a man who hated losing his men. He agreed to let Izuku try, but warned him that Grievous was hunting Jedi trophies, and Izuku was the ultimate prize. The plan was launched at dawn. The 500 first laid down suppressing fire, while Izuku activated full cowl. He did not run. He vanished. He moved through the dense jungle canopy, bouncing off the giant fungal stems like a green pinball. The droids could not track him. Their targeting computers were designed to calculate lead times for biological entities that moved at standard speeds or Jedi who moved with the flow of the Force. Izuku moved with the explosive propulsion of stockpiled kinetic energy. He hit the first heavy cannon emplacement with a Detroit smash that didn't just destroy the droid operating it, but shattered the cannon's barrel and sent the recoil mechanism flying into the bunker behind it. The impact signaled the start of the chaos. The separatist line crumbled not because of superior numbers, but because of panic. Battle droids were programmed with fear subroutines to preserve self-preservation, and those subroutines were overloading. They were reporting a Jedi who moved like a projectile and hit like an orbital bombardment. Izuku tore through the line using Black Whip to grab super battle droids and swing them into each other like wrecking balls. He did not kill the droids with malice. He dismantled them with efficiency. But the ease of the assault was a trap. As Izuku landed in the center of the clearing to secure the perimeter, the ground beneath him exploded. It was not a mine. It was a trapdoor. He fell into a subterranean chamber that had been prepared specifically for him. The lights activated instantly, blindingly white. Standing in the center of the room was General Grievous. The cyborg general coughed a wet metallic hacking sound and discarded his cape. He ignited 4 lightsabers, 2 blue and 2 green, taken from the corpses of his victims. Grievous did not have the Force. He had cybernetic reflexes computed to counter Jedi forms. He had studied the footage of the Sector 1313 incident. He knew the boy broke his bones when he used too much power, Grievous attacked with the speed of a rotary fan. His lightsabers became a wall of plasma. Izuku dodged using his danger sense to predict the angles of the strikes, but the confined space worked against him. He couldn't use a massive smash without bringing the ceiling down on both of them. He had to rely on precision. He activated smokescreen, flooding the room with purple smoke to blind the cyborg. Grievous laughed a mechanical sound devoid of joy and activated his optical sensors cycling through thermal and magnetic vision. He saw Izuku through the smoke and lunged. A lightsaber grazed Izuku's shoulder, burning through the reinforced plating and searing his flesh. The pain was instant and sharp, but Izuku did not scream. He analyzed. The cyborg was fast, but he was mechanical. He had joints. He had limits. Izuku used Fa Jin, building up kinetic energy in his legs as he bobbed and weaved. He waited for Grievous to overcommit to a spinning strike. When the cyborg stepped forward, Izuku released the energy not as a punch, but as a burst of speed. He got inside the lightsaber guard. He placed his hand on Grievous's chest plate. 5th percent. Impact. The force of the blow dented the durasteel chest plate and knocked the wind out of the cyborg's biological lungs. Grievous staggered back, coughing violently. He had fought Jedi who used telekinesis to push him, but he had never been hit by something that felt like a mountain moving at the speed of sound. Izuku did not stop. He fired Black Whip, wrapping the tendrils around Grievous's 4 arms. The energy clashed with the lightsabers. The plasma blades hissed and sputtered against the black energy. Grievous roared and spun his wrists, trying to cut the tendrils, but Black Whip held. Izuku pulled, screaming with effort, trying to restrain the machine. He shouted at Grievous to yield. He shouted that he didn't want to kill him. This hesitation was a mistake. Grievous was not a villain from a comic book who could be redeemed. He was a warlord who had slaughtered billions. He triggered a hidden blaster in his mechanical arm and fired point blank at Izuku's stomach. Danger Sense screamed, but the distance was 0. The bolt hit Izuku in the gut. The armor absorbed the heat, but the kinetic impact folded him. He lost his focus. Black Whip dissolved. Grievous kicked him across the room. Izuku hit the wall and slid down, leaving a streak of blood. Grievous advanced, coughing again, ready to deliver the killing stroke. He raised 2 sabers for a scissor cut. The ceiling above them melted. A blue blade sliced through the reinforced duracrete, and Anakin Skywalker dropped into the hole. He did not land gracefully. He landed with the fury of a collapsing star. He interposed his blade between Grievous and Izuku. Anakin's face was twisted in a snarl. He pushed with the force, not a gentle shove, but a telekinetic battering ram that launched Grievous into the far wall, burying the cyborg under tons of rubble. Anakin knelt beside Izuku. He checked the wound. It was a severe bruise, but the armor had held. Anakin looked at the boy and asked why he had hesitated. He asked why he had tried to capture a monster that needed to be destroyed. Izuku gasped for air, clutching his stomach. He said that even a machine had a heart. He said he heard the coughing. He heard the living thing inside the metal. Anakin stared at him. The statement was ludicrous. Grievous was a butcher. But Anakin felt the sincerity in the boy's pain. It was the same conflict Anakin felt when he thought about the clones or the people he failed to save. It was the refusal to accept the cold calculus of war. They evacuated the pit as the clone troopers secured the ridge. The Battle of Beluchia was a victory. The separatists retreated, but the strategic cost was high. Izuku was injured, and the logic of his existence was causing friction. That night in the medical tent, Captain Rex approached Izuku. The clone captain held his helmet in his hands. He looked at the boy who was covered in bacta patches. Rex asked why Izuku had destroyed the cannons himself. He asked why he didn't let the clones do their job. Izuku looked at Rex with eyes that were too old for his face. He told Rex that he couldn't watch them die. He said that back in his world, heroes sacrificed themselves so others didn't have to. Rex was silent for a long time. He said that in this world soldiers were made to die so that peace could live. Izuku replied that a peace built on the bodies of the disposable was not peace. It was just quiet oppression. This conversation was overheard by half the platoon. The seed was planted. The clones began to paint green lightning bolts on their armor. They began to take risks to save each other. The discipline of the 501st was fraying not into chaos, but into brotherhood. Far away on the rainy world of Sereno, Count Dooku watched the hollow recordings of the battle. He sat in his high tower sipping wine. He watched the green blur dismantle his droid lines. He watched the boy try to spare Grievous. Dooku was a man of culture and philosophy, a former Jedi who had become disillusioned with the hypocrisy of the Order. He saw in Izuku something fascinating. He did not see a Jedi. He saw a powerful idiot, a being of immense potential wasted on the philosophy of a child. But Dooku also saw the biology. He had his scientists analyze the blood samples recovered from the blaster scorch on Grievous's armor. No midichlorians, but the cells were bursting with a unique energy storage capacity. It was genetic. It was a mutation. Dooku realized that this was not a force entity, but a biological evolution. If the clones could be spliced with this DNA, the war would be over in a week. Or if the boy could be turned, he would be a weapon greater than any Death Star. Dooku contacted his master. Sidious agreed. The boy was to be tested further. The next phase would not be a battle of armies, but a battle of ideologies. They would force him to choose between his morals and his victory. The escalation came 2 months later on the planet Jabim. It was a mud-soaked world where rain never stopped and the ground swallowed walkers whole. The local nationalists were supported by the separatists, and the Republic was bogged down in a brutal guerrilla war. The supply lines were cut. The 501st was stranded in a valley surrounded by artillery on the cliffs. The mud neutralized Izuku's speed. He sank every time he tried to run. He couldn't generate the friction needed for full cowl traction. He was reduced to slogging through the slime, with the clones carrying supplies on his back because the repulsor lifts had failed. Morale was breaking. Clones were getting trench foot and dysentery. The Jedi General Pong Krell had been assigned to take temporary command, while Anakin was recalled to Coruscant for a strategy briefing. Krell was a massive basilisk with 4 arms and a hatred for clones that he barely concealed. He treated the troopers like cannon fodder, sending them on suicide waves to reveal enemy positions. Izuku clashed with Krell immediately, the first time Krell ordered a platoon to march across a minefield to clear it for the tanks. Izuku physically blocked the path. He stood in the mud, his suit caked in filth, and refused to move. Krell ignited his 2 double-bladed lightsabers. The hum was menacing in the rain. He called Izuku a defective experiment. He called him a pet. He threatened to cut him down for insubordination. Izuku did not flinch. He told Krell that if he wanted to clear the mines, he should do it himself. The clones watched terrified. A clone did not defy a Jedi general. It was treason. But Izuku was not a clone, and he was not a Jedi. He was a hero. Krell sensed the danger. He sensed that the boy was not bluffing. And more importantly, he sensed that the clones were raising their weapons, not at the enemy, but at him. The 501st was ready to fire on a Jedi to protect the boy. Krell laughed a deep rumbling sound. He backed down, claiming he was merely testing their resolve. But the damage was done. The chain of command was shattered. The climax of Jabim occurred when the Separatists launched a final offensive. They didn't send droids. They sent a massive biological weapon, a dispersal cloud of a viral agent designed to liquefy the lungs of anyone with Jango Fett's DNA. It was a clone killer. The cloud rolled down the valley like a yellow fog. Krell ordered the troops to hold the line. He wanted them to die. He wanted to wipe out the battalion to cover his own treachery as he planned to defect to Dooku. Izuku smelled the danger. His quirk flared so hard it brought him to his knees. He saw the gas. He saw the clones checking their seals, knowing their armor wasn't rated for this grade of toxin. Izuku made a choice. He couldn't punch gas. He couldn't smash a virus. He had to blow it away. He climbed the highest rock in the center of the valley. He tapped into the stockpile. He didn't need 100% of his power for a punch. He needed 100% of his wind pressure. He prepared a Delaware smash, but on a scale he had never attempted. He wasn't aiming at a villain. He was aiming at the sky. He focused one for all into his fingers. He visualized the air currents. He visualized the weather systems. He flicked. The shockwave was deafening. It didn't just move the air, it vacated the valley. The pressure wave hit the yellow fog and blasted it back up the cliffs, shattering the rock faces and sending the viral cloud into the upper atmosphere, where the high-altitude winds would disperse it harmlessly. The recoil shattered every finger on Izuku's right hand. The bones turned to powder. He collapsed into the mud, screaming in silence. But the gas was gone. The clones were alive. Krell watched in fury. His plan to massacre the clones had been thwarted by a boy who broke the weather. Krell decided to end it. He lunged at the prone Izuku, intending to decapitate him while he was vulnerable. "Traitor!" Krell roared, bringing his sabers down. A blue bolt of plasma intercepted the green blades. Captain Rex stood over Izuku, holding his dual DC-17 blasters. He had fired a stun bolt, not to kill, but to interrupt. Then every clone in the valley opened fire. They didn't fire stun. They fired blue lethal plasma. Krell deflected the first dozen shots, spinning his blades like a windmill, but there were too many. The 500 first executed their general. They did not do it for the Republic. They did it for Deku. When Anakin returned, he found a scene of mutiny that was technically a victory. Krell was dead. The clones were alive. Izuku was unconscious in a med capsule, his hand destroyed again. Anakin listened to Rex's report. He heard about Krell's treachery. He heard about the gas. He looked at the body of the Jedi Master riddled with blaster marks. Anakin should have been horrified. A Jedi killed by his own troops. It was the nightmare of the Order. But Anakin felt a grim satisfaction. Krell had betrayed his men. He deserved to die, and Izuku had saved them. Anakin realized that the boy was right. The code was flawed. If the code protected monsters like Krell, then the code was wrong. Anakin sat by Izuku's capsule as the gunship lifted off. He looked at his own mechanical hand. He looked at Izuku's shattered fingers. They were both breaking themselves to fix a galaxy that didn't want to be fixed. The consequences of Jabim were catastrophic for the Jedi Order's stability. The Council wanted to court-martial Rex for killing a Jedi. They wanted to confine Izuku for inciting a mutiny, but the public story was already out. Palpatine had ensured the Holonet reported it as a heroic defense against a traitorous Jedi. Izuku was a hero. The clones were heroes. The Jedi Council looked like incompetent bureaucrats protecting a traitor. The public trust in the Jedi plummeted. The public trust in the Green Spark and the Chancellor's office soared. Izuku woke up in the Bacta tank on Coruscant again. This time, He didn't feel like a prisoner. He felt like a weapon that was being sharpened. He looked at his hand floating in the healing fluid. The doctors said the nerve damage was permanent. He would have tremors. He wouldn't be able to make a fist without pain, but he had saved them. A secret meeting in the industrial sector. Izuku was discharged and wandering the lower levels trying to clear his head. He was approached by a hooded figure. It was not a Sith. It was a Mandalorian. A woman in blue and silver armor. Bo-Katan Kryzer. She had heard of the outsider who fought with raw power. She told him that there were others who hated the war. She told him that there was a third path, not Republic, not Separatist, a path of Mandalore. She offered him a place where strength was respected, not regulated. Izuku declined politely, saying he had to stay with his friends. Bo-Katan nodded and gave him a small device. "When the galaxy burns," she said, "and it will burn, call us. We remember what honor looks like." Izuku watched her leave. He felt the danger sense buzzing again, not for a battle, but for the future. The board was set. The pieces were moving, and the timeline was bending toward a breaking point that no prophecy had predicted. The Force was holding its breath. The prosthetic enhancement for Izuku Midoriya's right arm was not a replacement, but a cage. Anakin Skywalker had designed it himself in the fevered, sleepless nights following the Jabim campaign. The device was a skeletal framework of reinforced cortosis weave alloy that clamped over Izuku's forearm and hand. It did not restore the shattered nerves or regrow the powdered bone, but it provided an external exoskeleton that could withstand the pressure of one for all. Anakin fitted it in the silence of his quarters on Coruscant. The metal clicked and hissed as the servos locked into place. Izuku flexed his fingers. The movement was mechanical and accompanied by the whine of micro-hydraulics. He could not feel the texture of the tools on the table, but he could crush them if he wasn't careful. Anakin told him that the brace would absorb 70% of the recoil from his quirk. It allowed him to use 40% of his power without breaking the limb again, but it stripped him of his tactile sensitivity. It was a trade-off. Power for feeling. Izuku looked at the black metal claw that was now his hand and saw it as a symbol of his integration into this universe. He was becoming harder. He was becoming more like the machines he fought. The war had shifted since Jabim. The public perception of the Jedi was fracturing while the legend of the Green Commander grew. The clones of the 501st had quietly repainted their helmets. The blue markings now featured jagged green lines. They called themselves the Deku Squad when the officers weren't listening. But the real shift was happening in the biology of the army. On the orbital station above Ringo Vinda, a clone trooper named Tup had executed a Jedi general in the middle of combat. It was sudden and irrational. The official report said it was combat fatigue or a parasite. Izuku read the report and his stomach turned. He knew Tup. He knew the clones were loyal. Danger sense had not triggered before the shot. That meant there was no malice. It was involuntary. It was a malfunction. ARC Trooper Fives had been investigating the incident, and his messages to Izuku were becoming increasingly frantic. Fives claimed that there was a conspiracy. He claimed the Kaminoans were hiding something in the clone brains. Izuku met Fives in a heavy industrial sector on Coruscant. It was raining acid rain that sizzled against the pavement. Fives was on the run. The Coruscant guard was hunting him. When Izuku found him, the clone was shivering and erratic. Fives held a datapad with shaking hands. He showed Izuku the schematics of the inhibitor chips. He explained that every clone had a biochip implanted in their cerebral cortex. The Kaminoans said it was to curb aggression, but Fives had proof it could be used to override their free will, to make them kill on command. Izuku looked at the schematics. His mind raced back to his own world. He thought of the Nomus. He thought of artificial soldiers programmed to obey without question. The horror of it washed over him. The clones were not just soldiers, they were sleeper agents. Every friend he had made in the 501st was a walking bomb, waiting for a detonation code. The warehouse doors blew open. Commander Fox and a squad of Coruscant Guard shock troopers stormed in. They had their weapons raised. Fox ordered Fives to stand down. He called Fives a traitor and an assassin. Fives screamed that he was trying to save the Republic. He raised a blaster. Fox tightened his finger on the trigger. It was the moment history was supposed to break. In the original timeline, Fives would die here. The secret would die with him. The Jedi would remain blind until it was too late. But in this timeline there was a variable. Danger Sense screamed, not at Fox, but at the situation, the tragedy of it, the waste. Izuku did not think. He moved. He activated full cowl at 30%. The green lightning illuminated the dark warehouse. He crossed the distance between the troopers and Fives in a fraction of a second. Fox fired. The blue plasma bolt screamed toward Fives' chest. Izuku caught it. He didn't catch it with his hand. He caught it with the flat of his new cortosis brace. The energy bolt hit the metal and dissipated in a shower of sparks. The impact jarred Izuku's shoulder, but he didn't budge. He stood between the clones, a barrier of will and iron. Fox was stunned. He shouted for the commander to step aside. He said Fives was a dangerous fugitive. Izuku lowered his stance. He told Fox that no one was dying today. He said they were going to talk. Anakin Skywalker and Captain Rex arrived moments later, running into the tense standoff. Anakin saw the scene. He saw Izuku protecting a mad clone. He saw the shock troopers hesitating. Anakin ignited his lightsaber, but he didn't attack. He demanded an explanation. Fives, emboldened by Izuku's protection, spilled everything. He told Anakin about the Chancellor. He told him that Palpatine had personally told him the chips were for the grand purpose. He connected the dots between the inhibitor chips and the destruction of the Jedi. Anakin listened. His face grew dark. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to call Fives a liar. Palpatine was his friend. Palpatine was the grandfather he never had. But Anakin looked at Izuku. He saw the boy's eyes. They were glowing with the intensity of one for all. Izuku told Anakin that Fives was telling the truth. He said he could feel the intent. He could feel the shadow hanging over the clones. He reminded Anakin of the feeling on Ord Mantell, the heavy feeling, the wrongness. Anakin looked at Rex. Rex took off his helmet. He looked at Fives. He said that he believed his brother. The choice was made in that silence. A small choice. To listen instead of shoot. To trust a friend over a superior. Anakin deactivated his lightsaber. He ordered Fox to lower his weapon. Fox hesitated. He said his orders came directly from the Chancellor's office. Anakin stepped forward, and his voice was cold steel. He said he was a general of the Grand Army of the Republic, and he was countermanding the order. He said Fives was under his protection. Fox looked at the Jedi. He looked at the boy with the lightning. He looked at the 501st captain. He lowered his blaster. They took Fives to the Jedi Temple, not to the Chancellor. They went through the back channels. The revelation hit the Jedi Council like a seismic charge. The evidence was undeniable. The chips were real. The protocols were real. Order 66 was real. Mace Windu sat in the chamber, and his hands shook with suppressed rage. The Republic they were fighting for was a lie. The army they led was a trap. Yoda looked old, older than his 900 years. He realized that the shroud of the dark side had been woven into the very fabric of their victory. They had been leading the galaxy into a slaughterhouse. But the enemy was listening. Palpatine had surveillance everywhere. When a fox failed to report the death of Fives, the Sith Lord knew his timeline had been disrupted. He sat in his office and felt the tremor in the Force. The boy. It was always the boy. The variable had protected the catalyst. Palpatine realized he could not wait. He could not let the Jedi dismantle the chips. He had to act now. He had to salvage the grand plan before it collapsed completely. He reached for the encrypted comm channel. He didn't execute Order 66 globally. It was too early. The chips weren't fully calibrated for a preemptive strike without the pretext of a Jedi rebellion. Instead, he activated a contingency. Order 37. The mass arrest of subversives. He declared the 501st Legion and the Jedi Council enemies of the state. He framed the survival of Fives as a Jedi plot to assassinate the Chancellor using a brainwashed clone. He spun the narrative instantly. The Jedi were trying to take over. They had compromised the clone army. He, Palpatine, was the only one who could stop them. He activated the chips of the Coruscant Guard and the 212th Battalion who were stationed on the planet. The temple siege began an hour later. It wasn't the stealthy night march of the original timeline. It was a chaotic daylight assault. Gunships painted in the red of the diplomatic guard descended on the Jedi temple. Walkers marched up the processional way. The Jedi were caught off guard, but they were not blind. They had the warning from Fives. They were mobilizing. Izuku was in the room of 1,000 fountains with Ahsoka and Fives when the first shell hit the outer wall. The glass ceiling shattered. Debris rained down into the water. Izuku looked up. Danger sense was a continuous white noise. The war had come to the sanctuary. Ahsoka ignited her lightsabers. She looked at Izuku. She asked what they should do. Izuku looked at his mechanical hand. He clenched it. He said they had to protect the younglings. He said they had to hold the line. The Battle of the Jedi Temple was a meat grinder. The Jedi, realizing the betrayal, fought with desperate ferocity. But they were fighting their own men. They were fighting clones they had served with for years. Izuku stood at the main entrance. He was the anchor. He used Black Whip to create a web across the massive doors, catching missiles and throwing them back at the walkers. He didn't kill the clones. He couldn't. He knew they were trapped in their own minds. He used Smokescreen to confuse them. He used F.A. Jin to knock them unconscious with shockwaves. He was a whirlwind of non-lethal violence. Anakin was on the Council spire. He was fighting his way toward the communication center. He needed to broadcast the truth. He needed to tell the galaxy about the chips, but he was intercepted. Not by a clone, by Count Dooku. The Sith Lord had been summoned by Sidious to crush the rebellion before it could spread. Dooku stepped off a shuttle, his cape flowing in the wind. He looked at Anakin. He smiled. He told Anakin that this was the inevitable result of Jedi arrogance. He told him the Republic was dead. Anakin attacked, but he was distracted. He could feel the clones dying below. He could feel the betrayal. He was fighting with anger, but it was unfocused. Dooku was precise. He taunted Anakin. He pushed him back. Then he made a mistake. He taunted Izuku. He called the boy a failed experiment, an insect flailing against the window of destiny. Izuku heard it. He was 3 levels down, fighting off a squad of ARC troopers. He looked up. He saw the lightning on the spire. He saw his master, no, his general, in trouble. Izuku made a calculation. The door was held. The younglings were evacuating to the lower levels. He was needed elsewhere. He crouched. He channeled 45%. The cortosis brace whined in protest. The concrete beneath him pulverized. He launched himself vertically. He shot up the side of the temple like a green comet. He crested the spire just as Dooku was preparing to deliver a killing blow to a downed Anakin. Izuku didn't land. He used the momentum of his ascent. He spun in the air. Manchester smash. He brought his heel down on Dooku's force field. The Sith Lord had sensed him coming and raised a barrier, but he had calculated for a Jedi strike, not a physical impact of that magnitude. The barrier shattered like glass. Izuku's heel drove into Dooku's shoulder. The Count crumpled. The stone floor of the spire cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Dooku rolled away, gasping, his left arm hanging uselessly. He looked at the boy with genuine fear. This was not the Force. This was brute catastrophe. Anakin stood up. He saw Izuku standing between him and the Sith. He saw the smoke rising from the boy's costume. He saw the blood leaking from under the metal brace. And in that moment, Anakin made his choice. He didn't fall to the dark side. He didn't pledge himself to Palpatine. He stood next to the boy from another world. He realized that power wasn't about control. It was about protection. "Get up," Anakin said to Dooku. "We're not done." But they were done. A shuttle descended. It wasn't Dooku's. It was Palpatine's. The Chancellor stepped out onto the platform. He was not disfigured. He was still wearing the mask of the benevolent leader. He looked at Dooku. He looked at Anakin. He looked at Izuku. He clapped slowly. "Impressive," Palpatine said. His voice was amplified by the wind. "Truly impressive. You have derailed a plan 1,000 years in the making. You have saved a clone. You have revealed a secret. But you have forgotten one thing." Izuku glared at him. "What?" "You are still inside the cage." Palpatine smiled. He raised his hands. He didn't use lightning. He used the Force on the temple itself. He triggered the demolition charges that had been secretly planted in the foundation pillars during the renovations years ago. A contingency within a contingency. The spire shook. The temple began to collapse. Palpatine boarded his shuttle and lifted off, leaving Dooku behind to die with them. The Sith Lord looked at his master's retreating ship with a look of utter betrayal. Izuku reacted. He grabbed Anakin with Black Whip. He grabbed the injured Dooku with another tendril. He shouted for them to brace. He used float. He tried to hold the spire together, but it was too big. The physics were impossible. The temple was imploding. "Let go," Anakin shouted. "You can't save the building." "I have to save the history," Izuku screamed. Tears streamed down his face. "I have to save the symbol." "The symbol is the people." Anakin grabbed Izuku's face. "The Jedi are the people. Let it go, Deku." Izuku let go. They fell. They fell into the chaotic undercity of Coruscant as the Jedi Temple, the beacon of light for 10,000 years, crumbled into a massive cloud of dust and fire above them. The impact shook the planet. The mushroom cloud was visible from orbit. The era of the Jedi Order ended not with a silent purge, but with a thunderous collapse that every citizen on the planet witnessed. Izuku, Anakin, Ahsoka, Rex, and a prisoner Count Dooku were huddled in a maintenance shaft in level 1313. They were alive, but they were the most wanted beings in the galaxy. The holonet was already broadcasting the Chancellor's speech. He declared that the Jedi had attempted a coup and destroyed their own temple to hide the evidence of their treason. He announced the formation of the First Galactic Empire to ensure security and stability. The multiverse had shifted. There was no Darth Vader. Anakin Skywalker was still Anakin, but he was a fugitive. The clones were not all turned. The 501st and parts of the 212th, who had removed their chips, were now an insurgent army. And Dooku, betrayed by his master, sat in the corner of the safe house, nursing his broken arm. He looked at Izuku. "You have broken the game, boy," Dooku whispered. "Now there are no rules." Izuku looked at his hand. The brace was twisted and fused to his flesh. He was in pain, but he looked at the flickering hologram of Palpatine on a nearby screen. He felt a new emotion, not fear, not just anger. It was the cold clarity of a strategist. He turned to Anakin and the others. "We don't need a temple," Izuku said. "We have the truth, and we have a war to win." The timeline had not been saved. It had been shattered into a chaotic civil war where the lines between light and dark were erased. The Empire had risen, but the rebellion began on day one, and it was led by a Jedi Knight, a Sith Lord, a clone captain, and a hero who refused to let the world break him. The stage was set for the final convergence, but the cost was visible. In the chaos of the fall, the vestige world had gone silent. Izuku reached out for the predecessors and found nothing. The trauma of the temple's destruction, the massive exertion of power, or perhaps the proximity to the dark side nexus of the collapse, had severed his connection. He was alone in his head for the first time since inheriting the power. One for All was still there, a burning coal, but the voices were gone. He was piloting the power blind, and out in the dark, something else was waking up. Palpatine hadn't just destroyed the temple. He had unlocked an ancient Sith shrine beneath it, and whatever was inside was hungry for the strange green energy that had just saturated the atmosphere. The episode closed with a shot of Palpatine in his new throne room. He was not smiling. He was looking at a datapad. It showed the energy readings from the temple collapse. He swiped the screen. A new project file opened. It wasn't the Death Star. It was something biological, something based on the blood of the boy. The title of the project was simple: Nomu. The lower levels of Coruscant had always been a place where light went to die, but in the weeks following the fall of the Jedi Temple, the darkness had taken on a physical weight. The shadows of the level 1313 were no longer just the absence of light. They were the presence of the Empire. Stormtroopers in pristine white armor patrolled the catwalks, their boots ringing on the metal grates, with a rhythmic, terrifying precision that replaced the chaotic bustle of the old underworld. The citizens walked with their heads down. The hope that had briefly flared with the rebellion of the 501st had been smothered by the sheer, suffocating mass of Palpatine's new order. In the deepest recesses of the industrial sector, inside a decommissioned hypermatter refinery, the remnants of the resistance gathered. It was a small room for a movement that intended to save a galaxy. Anakin Skywalker stood over a holographic map that flickered with the unstable power of the grid. He looked different. The Jedi robes were gone, replaced by scavenged blast armor painted matte black. His hair was longer, and his eyes carried the haunted look of a man who had seen his entire life crumble and was trying to hold the dust together with sheer will. Beside him stood Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex, and in the corner, shackled to a heavy durasteel pipe, sat Count Dooku. The former Sith Lord looked withered. The loss of his arm and the betrayal by his master had aged him a decade and a month, but his eyes were still sharp, and he watched the boy sitting on the crate opposite him with a mixture of disdain and fascination. Izuku Midoriya was sharpening a piece of scrap metal. He didn't need a knife, but the repetitive motion helped ground him. His right arm was a ruin of twisted cortosis alloy and burned flesh. The metal brace Anakin had forged was now fused permanently to his limb, the heat of the temple collapse having melted the interface into his skin. He couldn't feel his fingers. He couldn't feel the vestiges. The voices of the predecessors were gone, leaving a hollow silence in his mind where wisdom used to be. All that remained was the stockpile, a burning sun of power that felt heavier every day, as if it were absorbing the ambient misery of the galaxy. Dooku cleared his throat. He told them that they were wasting time. He told them that every moment they sat in this hole, Sidious was strengthening his grip. Anakin slammed his fist on the table. He demanded the coordinates. Dooku smiled a thin, cruel smile. He said he had already given them the location. The Emperor was not in the Senate. He was not on a Star Destroyer. He was beneath the ruin. The destruction of the Jedi Temple was not just a symbolic act. It was an excavation. Beneath the foundations of the Jedi holy site lay an ancient Sith shrine, a nexus of dark side energy that the Jedi had tried to cap for 1,000 years. Palpatine had cracked the seal, and he was using the energy to finish what Dooku had started with the cloners. Project Chimera. That was the name on the encrypted files Dooku had surrendered. It was not just a cloning project. It was a synthesis. Palpatine had obtained samples of Izuku's blood from the medical bay on the Resolute before the purge. He had combined the genetic markers of the quirk with the mutable DNA of the clones and the alchemy of the dark side. He was not building soldiers. He was building vessels. Izuku stopped sharpening the metal. He looked up. His green eyes were dull, but they burned with a cold resolve. He asked Dooku how many. Dooku shrugged. He said the process was unstable. Most subjects exploded, but Sidious only needed one success to replace the Jedi, a creature that obeyed without question and possessed the power to break physics. Izuku stood up. The air around him vibrated. He told Anakin they had to go. Tonight. They couldn't wait for a strategy. They couldn't wait for the rebel cells to mobilize. This was not a war of armies. It was a race against a singularity. The infiltration of the temple ruins was a descent into hell. The surface of the temple precinct was a crater of slag and twisted rebar surrounded by a perimeter of heavy turbo lasers and the new Imperial Royal Guard. But the resistance did not come from the sky. They came from below. They navigated the sewer systems and the ancient ventilation shafts that predated the Republic. Izuku led the way. His danger sense was a continuous scream, a white noise that he had learned to filter out. He didn't need it to know there was danger. The very air tasted of ozone and blood. They reached the sub-basement levels where the stone turned from Jedi granite to Sith obsidian. The walls were covered in angular glowing glyphs that hurt the eyes. The heat was oppressive. Rex checked his blaster. The power pack was full, but his hands were sweating. He whispered to Fives that this felt like a tomb. Fives nodded. He said it was worse. It was a womb. They breached the main chamber of the shrine. It was a cavernous space illuminated by the red glow of a geothermal vent and the sickly yellow light of stasis tubes. In the center of the room, suspended over the dark side virgins, was a machine that looked like a torture device. And standing before it was Emperor Palpatine. He wore robes of crimson velvet, and he did not look surprised. He looked delighted. He turned to face them, his yellow eyes gleaming in the dark. He welcomed Anakin. He welcomed the clone traitors. And he saved a special nod for the boy. He told Izuku that he should be proud. His biology had provided the missing key. The Force was a river, but quirks were a dam. Palpatine had learned to break the dam. He gestured to the larger stasis tube. The glass was thick, but through the murky fluid, they could see a shape. It was massive. It had the black skin of a Nomu, but it wore the armor of a clone trooper. Its brain was exposed, pulsing with a red light. Palpatine pressed a button. The glass shattered. The creature fell to the floor with a wet thud. It stood up. It was 8 feet tall. Its face was a featureless mask of scar tissue, except for a single mechanical eye. It roared, and the sound was not a voice. It was a forced scream, a wave of pure kinetic pressure that knocked the clones off their feet and cracked the obsidian walls. Izuku recognized the feeling. It was the feeling of the USJ. It was the feeling of Shigaraki. But it was cold. It was devoid of humanity. It was the Force twisted into a knot of violence. Palpatine called it Subject Zero, the first Sith Nomu. He commanded it to kill them. The battle began with a blur of motion. Anakin and Ahsoka ignited their lightsabers and engaged the Emperor's royal guards, who swarmed from the shadows. The red and blue blades clashed in a strobe light of plasma. Rex and the clones took cover behind the ancient pillars, firing disciplined volleys into the ranks of the stormtroopers. But Izuku only had eyes for the monster. Subject Zero lunged at him. It moved with the speed of a force-enhanced master. Izuku dodged, narrowly avoiding a fist that pulverized the stone floor where he had been standing. He activated full cowl at 40%. The green lightning crackled around him, illuminating the dark shrine. He circled the beast. He analyzed. It was fast. It was strong. But it was mindless. It attacked in straight lines. Izuku wound up a Manchester smash and kicked the creature in the side of the head. The impact should have taken its head off. Instead, the creature's neck absorbed the blow, the muscle fibers rippling like water. It didn't flinch. It grabbed Izuku's leg mid-air. Izuku's eyes widened. Shock absorption. Palpatine had replicated the Prime Nomu's quirk, using Sith alchemy to harden the cells. The creature slammed Izuku into the ground. The breath left his body. The creature raised a fist charged with purple lightning, force lightning. It was a biological conduit for the dark side. Izuku rolled away as the fist came down, shattering the rock. He scrambled to his feet, clutching his chest. His ribs were cracked. He realized with horror that this thing was better than him. It had his power, but it had no limits. It had no pain. Anakin saw the boy in trouble. He tried to break away from the guards, but Palpatine intervened. The Emperor didn't draw a lightsaber. He laughed and raised his hands. He cast a storm of lightning that engulfed Anakin and Ahsoka. They were forced to cross their blades to block it, their feet sliding backward across the floor. Palpatine taunted them. He told Anakin that his anger was delicious, but his attachment was his failure. He told him that he could have saved Padme if he had just submitted. Anakin roared and pushed back, but the dark side in this place was too strong. Palpatine was drawing power directly from the shrine. He was a god in his own temple. Dooku, who had been guarding the rear, saw the stalemate. He saw the Emperor's back turned. He saw the opportunity for revenge. Dooku was a pragmatist. He knew he wouldn't survive this, but his pride demanded that Sidious pay. He used the Force to pull a discarded blaster to his remaining hand. He aimed not at Palpatine, but at the machine above the vent, the containment field generator. If he destroyed it, the raw energy of the shrine would consume them all. Palpatine sensed the intent. He didn't even turn around. He flicked a finger. Dooku gasped as an invisible grip crushed his throat. Palpatine lifted the old count into the air. He told Dooku that he had outlived his usefulness. He clenched his fist. There was a sickening crunch. Dooku fell to the floor dead before he hit the ground. The last of the Sith Lords was gone, discarded like a broken toy. Izuku watched Dooku die. He felt a spike of cold terror, not for himself, but for the sheer indifference of it. Palpatine didn't care about life. He didn't care about loyalty. He was a void. Subject Zero charged again. Izuku met the charge. He stopped thinking about survival. He started thinking about cost. He couldn't beat this thing with 40%. He couldn't beat it with strategy. The creature was designed to counter him. It was absorbing his kinetic energy and feeding it back into the Force lightning. Izuku looked at his right arm. The cortosis brace was glowing red hot. The metal was failing. The bone beneath it was dust. He had one punch left, one real punch. He remembered All Might's voice. Go beyond. He remembered the feeling of the embers fading. He looked at Anakin, who was struggling to hold back the lightning. He looked at Rex, who was bleeding from a blaster wound, but still firing. He looked at the galaxy that was burning outside. He closed his eyes. He reached into the stockpile. He didn't pull 40%. He didn't pull 100%. He pulled everything. He pulled the embers. He pulled the history. He pulled the very concept of one for all. The green lightning turned white. The air in the chamber grew heavy. Gravity distorted. The stones began to float. Palpatine stopped laughing. He turned to look at the boy. He felt it. It wasn't the Force. It was something else. It was a singularity, a density of will that bent the laws of the universe. Izuku opened his eyes. They were glowing pure white. He didn't say a word. He vanished. He appeared in front of Subject Zero. The creature tried to punch. Izuku didn't dodge. He took the hit. The fist struck his chest and the armor shattered. Ribs snapped. But Izuku didn't move backward. He moved forward. He drove his right fist into the creature's chest. The cortosis brace disintegrated instantly. The flesh of his arm vaporized. The energy release was not a punch. It was a nuclear event. United States of Smash. The impact did not just destroy the Nomu. It atomized it. The shockwave hit the back wall of the shrine and obliterated it, exposing the geothermal magma beneath. The force of the blow traveled upward, cracking the foundations of the ruined temple all the way to the surface. The entire district of Coruscant shook. Palpatine was thrown across the room, his lightning disrupted. He slammed into the ancient altar. He looked up with genuine fear. The boy was destroying the shrine. He was destroying the nexus. The energy from Izuku's arm didn't stop. It connected with the dark side vergence in the pit. The two energies, the stockpile power of human will and the ancient corruption of the Sith, collided. They were incompatible. Reality screamed. A rift opened in the center of the room. It was jagged and multicolored, tearing through the fabric of the Star Wars galaxy. It looked like the sky over Ord Mantell, but violent and unstable. The vacuum began to pull everything in. The stormtroopers were sucked into the void, screaming as they vanished. The machinery was ripped from the floor. Anakin saw what was happening. He grabbed Ahsoka and Rex. He shouted that they had to leave. The shrine was collapsing into a black hole. He looked at Izuku. The boy was standing at the edge of the rift. His right side was gone. His arm was missing up to the shoulder, cauterized by the energy discharge. He was swaying. Anakin reached out with the Force to pull him back. "Deku, grab my hand," Anakin screamed. Izuku looked at him. He smiled. It was a weak, tired smile. He shook his head. He pointed at Palpatine, who was clinging to the altar, trying to crawl away. Izuku knew that if he left, the rift would close and Palpatine would survive. He would rebuild. He would make more Nomus. Someone had to hold the door open. Someone had to make sure the energy neutralized the darkness. "Save them," Izuku whispered. The sound carried over the roar of the void. "Be the hero." Izuku turned his back on Anakin. He walked toward the rift. He walked toward Palpatine. The Emperor shrieked and unleashed a final storm of lightning. Izuku didn't block it. He walked through it. The lightning danced over his skin, but he didn't stop. He grabbed Palpatine by the robes with his remaining left hand. He dragged the Sith Lord toward the tear in reality. Palpatine thrashed and screamed, cursing the Jedi, cursing the boy, cursing the universe. Izuku jumped. He took the Emperor with him into the singularity. Anakin screamed a sound of pure anguish. The rift flared white, blinding them all. Then it imploded. The pressure wave threw Anakin, Ahsoka, and the clones out of the chamber and into the corridor. The ceiling collapsed behind them, sealing the shrine forever under millions of tons of rock. The silence that followed was absolute. The escape was a blur. Anakin dragged his team to the surface. They emerged into the grey dawn of Coruscant. The temple ruins had collapsed further, forming a massive crater in the center of the district. Smoke rose in a thick black column. The Imperial garrison was in chaos. The disturbance in the force caused by the rift had knocked out every sensor on the planet for 10 minutes. The Resistance had a window. They stole a shuttle and blasted into orbit. Anakin sat in the pilot's seat. His hands were shaking. He felt the force. It was different. The heavy, suffocating darkness that had been building for years was gone. The shroud was lifted, but so was the light. The force felt bruised, quiet. Palpatine was gone. The boy was gone. Days turned into weeks. The galaxy held its breath. The Empire did not fall. The bureaucratic machine Palpatine had built was too robust. Mas Amedda and the Grand Moffs took control, declaring that the Emperor had been assassinated by Jedi terrorists, but that his vision would endure. The Empire remained a tyranny, but it was a tyranny without a Sith Lord. There was no one to foresee the future, no one to manipulate destiny. It was just a government of cruel men, and cruel men could be fought. On the jungle moon of Yavin 4, the Alliance to Restore the Republic established its first true base. It was not led by Mon Mothma or Bail Organa alone. It was led by a council of war. Anakin Skywalker sat at the head of the table. He was a fugitive, a man with a metal hand and a broken heart. Beside him sat Ahsoka Tano, the Grey Jedi, and Captain Rex, commander of the Free Clone Army. They were looking at a hologram of the galaxy. It was red with Imperial sectors, but there were green pockets, pockets where the legend of the green spark had taken root. Anakin touched the lightsaber at his belt. He thought about the boy. He thought about the sacrifice. He realized that Izuku hadn't just saved them from Palpatine. He had saved Anakin from himself. He had shown him that power wasn't about destiny or prophecy. It was about choice. Anakin stood up. He looked at his friends. "We have a lot of work to do," Anakin said. His voice was steady. "The Empire thinks they won because they have the ships, but we have something else." "What's that, General?" Rex asked. Anakin looked at the green starbird symbol painted on the side of the X-wing outside. "We have a legacy," Anakin said, "and we are going to go beyond." The scene shifted one last time. It didn't go to a Force ghost. It didn't go to a happy ending. It went to the unknown regions of the multiverse. In a void between realities, floating in a sea of stars that were neither from the Republic nor Japan, a body drifted. It was battered. It was missing an arm. But it was alive. Green lightning flickered faintly around the chest of Izuku Midoriya. He was asleep. He was lost. But in the silence of the void, a new voice spoke. It wasn't the first user. It wasn't All Might. It was a voice that sounded like the Wills, like the Force itself acknowledging a new constituent. "Rest now, traveler. The balance is reset." But the journey is not over. Izuku's hand twitched. The green light pulsed once, strong, defiant. The screen cut to black. The galaxy did not forget the color green. In the years following the collapse of the temple, the Imperial propaganda machine worked tirelessly to erase the name Deku from the history books. They claimed he was a terrorist, a biological experiment gone wrong, or a mass hallucination induced by Jedi mind tricks. But the Empire could not scrub the graffiti from the lower levels of Coruscant. They could not stop the clone troopers who had deserted from painting jagged lightning bolts on their armor. They could not stop the children in the outer rim from wearing red shoes. The myth of the boy who punched a god became a whisper that traveled faster than light speed. It became the foundation of the new resistance. On the jungle moon of Yavin, 4 General Anakin Skywalker stood before a new class of recruits. He was a different man now. The mechanical breathing of a Sith Lord was absent, but so was the reckless grin of the Clone Wars hero. He wore black armor that was purely functional, and his organic hand rested on a glass case in the center of the command room. Inside the case was not a lightsaber or a Jedi holocron. It was a burnt, tattered notebook with the words "Hero Analysis for the Future" scorched onto the cover. It was the only physical object Izuku Midoriya had left behind, found in the wreckage of the safe house. Anakin opened the book with reverence. He did not teach the recruits about the midi-chlorians or the will of the Force. He read from the pages about saving people with a smile. He read about the essence of a hero being the body moving before the mind could think. He was building an army not of peacekeepers, but of saviors. Ahsoka Tano watched from the doorway. She saw the change in the Force. It was no longer a binary of light and dark. It was a spectrum. The rigid dogmas of the Jedi and Sith had died in the singularity, leaving behind something messier and more human. Far away on the rainy world of Kamino, the cloning facilities were silent. The Empire had shut them down, fearing another uprising. But in the abandoned barracks of the 501st, there was a shrine. It was made of scrap metal and plastoid helmets. In the center was a rough carving of a boy with rabbit ears on his cowl. A single candle burned there, kept alive by the clones who still lived in the shadows. They didn't pray to the Force. They swore oaths to the green spark. They remembered that they were not meat droids. They were men who had been worth saving. The legacy of the collision was not a healed universe, but a woken one. The absolute authority of destiny had been shattered. People realized that if a quirkless boy could break the Emperor, then a powerless citizen could break a Moff. The fear was gone, replaced by a dangerous, stubborn resolve. The story of the Visitor was over, but the story of the revolution he ignited was just beginning. The timeline had scar tissue, now thick and unyielding. And in the unknown regions where the stars thinned out into the dark, the Force waited patiently for the day the lightning would strike again.